Hey guys, this is the Mall Fox here, and today I'm going to show you guys the Northlake Mall located in Tucker, Georgia, which is on the eastern side of Atlanta. History on this mall starts in the mid-1960s when developer Carter and Associates saw huge success with their recent opening of the Greenbrier Mall in Atlanta, saying the north side needed a powerful regional mall. At the time of construction and opening, the Northlake Mall would be the largest shopping mall in Atlanta, barely edging out other centers like Lenox Square and Perimeter Mall. Of course, it would only have this title for around a year because Lenox Square would undergo a renovation that would bring the title back to it for the largest inner Atlanta shopping mall. But that brings us to the opening date for the mall, October 6th, 1971. Anchored by Davison's, Penney, and Sears, with junior anchor McCrory's, Northlake Mall would be roughly 1 million square feet in size and feature space for almost 100 stores. The ribbon at the grand opening ceremony was cut by then Governor of Georgia, Jimmy Carter, and architecturally, the mall originally featured fountains, quote, warmly landscaped walkways, end quote, and a system of escalators, which is vastly different than how it looks today, as you're seeing right now. What I've been able to find in the newspapers are some old pictures of how this mall used to look like when it opened on October 6th, 1971. This place looks gorgeous. Take a look at these photos. So this mall was not developed by just one entity. It was a collaboration between multiple different companies. One of which was one I mentioned earlier, Carter and Associates. Another was, and I apologize if I butchered this name, Ewell Pope of Atlanta, Trammell Crow, whom were based out of Texas, and Monumental Properties Inc., whom were based out of Baltimore, Maryland. Now, some tenants at opening included Baskin-Robbins, El Chico Restaurant, Zales, Lane Bryant, Kenny Shoes, Merle Norman, Record Bar, Walden Books, Spencer's Gifts, and many, many more. The construction and obviously operation of this mall was actually supposed to make improvements to the entire suburb, according to County Commissioner Clark Harrison, who said it would bring revenue and tax dollars, further improving public services both in the area and DeKalb County as a whole. Something I found interesting was that at the Northlake Mall, Penney had its own restaurant inside of the department store, and so did Sears. Most people might not know, but back in the day, more department stores operated as broadly as Sears did in terms of what services they offered. Most people know Sears offered auto centers and optical centers, but once upon a time, a Penney could have had an auto center, a garden center, a restaurant, etc., depending on where your store was located and how it was configured. By the way, check out these sweet uncovered storefronts. In all my previous visits, these were not visible, but they were in my visit on February 2024, which is when this video was filmed. Now, back to some history. The mall would switch hands relatively early, selling from its original developers to a group known as Corporate Property Investors, CPI for short, in mid-1979. The deal was for 5 malls and had a sale price of $200 million, which in today's money is around $866 million. As for community events, like most malls, a number of them would be held here over the years, including car shows, talent shows, and more. The first notable change at the mall would happen when R.H. Macys & Co., the company proper that owned both Macys and Davison's, would convert all Davison stores into Macys in 1986. Moving into the 1990s, around 1993, the mall would experience a renovation which saw the addition of a food court, adding a second entrance to the JCPenney by said food court, updating the mall flooring, and the removal of some of the mall's fountains, essentially transforming the entire mall into what we see today on this side. I mentioned how in 1993 it got that big renovation. Sure, the bones might still be there, but this is what it used to look like. And it does not look like this anymore. I don't think this elevator has ever worked in the 2 years I've been coming to this mall. Another big change would happen shortly after the 1993 renovation. In a space that was formerly occupied by the McCrory's and Piccadilly cafeteria, Parisian was added to the mall. The 103,000 square foot store opened on Monday, November 7th, 1994, and it was the 4th Parisian in the Atlanta metro area. For those that don't know, Parisian was an upscale retail department store chain that was based out of Birmingham, Alabama. Here's a newspaper picture from 1994 when Parisian opened at the Northlake Mall. Around this time, it is stated that 23 new stores had opened inside the mall and 15 others had renovations completed. The mall would change hands again when Simon DeBartolo Group acquired CPI in February of 1998. Fun fact, this was the same deal that gave Simon DeBartolo malls such as Lenox Square, Phipps, Gwinnett Place, and Town Center at Cobb. In addition to the then unbuilt mall in Buford, Georgia, now known as the Mall of Georgia. I wish I could have visited this mall while this fountain was still being used. In 2007, following the acquisition of Parisian by Belk, the store at Northlake Mall would not be rebranded and would instead close. The space would not be vacant for long, however. In 2008, Kohl's would fill in the space left by Parisian, opening in the first quarter of the year. Despite this swift anchor replacement, this would begin the downward trajectory of the Northlake Mall. Moving into the 2010s, the mall was still decently full of mainstays people would expect to find at any half-decent mall. Things like Shoe Department, Finish Line, Chick-fil-A, Victoria's Secret, GameStop, things like that. Although, there was definitely evidence of tenant rot, which is when lower quality tenants take over spaces previously occupied by nicer, more quality, name brand, and national chain tenants. One such example of a tenant leaving would be Old Navy, whom between 2007 and 2012 would leave the Northlake Mall, and they actually operated a quite big storefront inside the mall, so them leaving was a huge blow to the already struggling mall. Vacancies were starting to appear more frequently, and had been for some time, which was a sign of what was to come for the Northlake Mall. In 2014, Simon Property Group would spin off several malls, including Northlake Mall, to a group known as Washington Prime Group. They did this with a lot of their lesser performing properties. Washington Prime Group would end up known as WP Glimcher after a merger they did, whom would then sell the mall off again in 2016 to a group known as ATR Corinth, whom were based out of Texas. There were some high hopes as to what could be done with the Northlake Mall property. ATR Corinth had success in redeveloping the 100 Oaks Mall in Nashville from an occupancy of 45% to 99% by the time they sold it. So the hope was that somehow ATR Corinth could have redeveloped and brought different stores to this mall. Here's a fun little detail. This trading card hobby store off to the left was not open when I first went in 2022. And I want to say sometime late 2023 they had opened, which is interesting because I wouldn't imagine that many tenants would want to open here. But then again, I think a lot of trading card and hobby stores are low cost to maintain, and so I guess it makes sense why you see them in a lot of dying and dead malls. So, Simon Property Group obviously once owned this mall, and you can say a lot of things about Simon, how they bleach and destroy malls' aesthetic language, but what you cannot deny is typically they're really good at managing their properties. And for some reason, Simon saw a reason to spin Northlake off to another company. I honestly don't know why that is. The surrounding area of Northlake has an average household income of around $100,000. So, maybe my thought process would be that those people would rather go into the inner city Atlanta malls at this point, like Perimeter or even Lenox, instead of shopping at their mid-scale mall. Because, they have money and they're going to go to the nicer upscale malls? Not exactly sure. I do know that looking at news reports, though, over the years there have been several shootings apparently in and around the Northlake Mall. So that could have been a reason why potential shoppers would have, driven instead to another mall in Atlanta instead of coming here. Simon selling off the mall was bad and was definitely a sign that it was going downhill. But what really was the nail in the coffin were the anchor store closures that occurred throughout the mall. In March of 2016, Kohl's announced the closure of 18 stores during the summer of that year, including the one at the Northlake Mall. Then, in May 2018, it was announced that Sears would be closing in early July. Sears was an original tenant of the mall, and they lasted 47 years here. And then, lastly, in the infamous 154-store closing wave that JCPenney did, where they closed at so many struggling, dying malls, the Northlake store would close in 2020. This would leave the sole traditional anchor of the mall as Macys. They have found use, though, for the former Sears building. In 2021, Emory Healthcare moved in some of their health and admin offices into the building, and they currently use the automotive center for some sort of storage. As of August 2024, the latest news is that Macys has listed its Northlake Mall location as one of its 150 underperforming locations, and currently has it listed for sale. The building is 190,000 square feet and stands at 3 stories tall, although the third floor is just used for offices in a newspaper report I found from decades ago. So that concludes the current history of the mall as it sits right now. My personal experience with it? This was the second dead mall I ever went to. The first one was Georgia Square. And back when I first went in late 2022, this mall didn't have any of this artwork hung up on the wall on this side. So it actually looked pretty liminal looking, if you want to call it that. I'll throw up a picture right now. But obviously, I do think it looks a little bit more homey having the artwork up on the wall, so it's not just a blank wall that looks like a weird liminal hospital environment. One final thing about the Northlake Mall that I can talk about is I have been given pictures and told about how the lower floor of the JCPenney is absolutely disgusting. Standing water, mushy carpet, actively leaking ceiling, and rust on the escalators, as well as a bunch of missing ceiling tiles. Take a look. So while the one side of the JCPenney is kinda nasty and disgusting, the side that's closer to the food court, they actually have been using for a Spirit Halloween the last couple years. Hopefully they do it again this year. As for the future of Northlake Mall, it probably will end up redeveloped entirely eventually. But I do have one more cool thing to share. That stamp and coin shop has been here since the 90s, I believe, or the 70s, and I have a commemorative coin from the 50th anniversary of the mall. But that's going to conclude my video on the Northlake Mall. If you guys liked my video and would like to see more, consider hitting the subscribe button and leaving a like on this video. Leave me a comment if this was your childhood mall and you have a fond memory here, or if you'd just like to leave me a nice comment to read. And otherwise, stay tuned for the next mall video.